surprised when the Secretary of State first appointed made it his priority to deliver on Casement Park, committing £320 million for a stadium to host 5 matches at a time when there are huge waiting lists to be dealt with in the health service. Special needs education needs funding and social housing needs funding is an indefensible use of public money. Can the Secretary of State give us an assurance that the Government's view has not been influenced by any personal interventions by the Chief of Staff of the Labour Party, who has this is a personal project, and can he confirm that such intervention would be a breach of public standards in public life?
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman, what I said, it was a priority because a decision needs to be made. The fact is the government has inherited a commitment to hosting the Euros at Casement Park. It is now a year and 3 quarters since UEFA awarded that right to Northern Ireland and to the United Kingdom and Ireland. Nothing has happened during the year and 3 quarters since then to progress the project. We're left with a situation where the cost has gone through the roof, and we don't know, even if you had the money, whether you could build it in time, and that is why the government is looking at it, and that's why I said it was a priority to make a decision.
Hannah.
The GAA is overwhelmingly a force for good across our island, and I was pleased to see so many in Britain enjoying the magic of the hurling final via the BBC on Sunday. GAA fans in Northern Ireland, like Northern Ireland football fans awaiting sub-regional stadium funding, have been let down by a decade of storm and dither, by sniping like we've just seen, and by the last government. Had they greenlit the project when they said they would, construction would have been well underway in time for the Euros. Can the Minister give an assurance that Casement will ultimately be built, and that spectacles like we're going to see this Sunday for Armagh will in time be hosted in Belfast?
Well, I think we all look forward to wishing well to Armagh in the All-Ireland final. The Executive's committed to the Casement Park project. It's been a commitment for, I think, over a decade now, but it hasn't progressed. Windsor Park got an upgrade, Ravenhill got an upgrade, and it's important that Casement Park is built, which is why I said on my recent visit that one way or another that project needs to be completed.
Jim Allister.
Will the Secretary of State explain to the 356,000 citizens of Northern Ireland who await outpatient admissions and appointments, to the 94,000 who await inpatient admissions, why, in the Government's view, it seems to be a priority to pour hundreds of millions of pounds into a GAA sports stadium instead of fixing our health service? And if the Government commits money, and if the Euros do not come to Belfast, won't the Government be in the position where the rugby stadium, the football stadium didn't get a penny of Treasury or NIO money, but GAA did? How could that be fair, and how could that be proportionate?
Well, I hope very much that sport will be a force for unity in Northern Ireland rather than a source of division. And when it comes to the health service, the honourable gentleman makes a very powerful point. The state of the NHS in Northern Ireland, with the longest waiting lists in the United Kingdom, is a function, if I may say so, of decisions that the Executive has failed to take over many years, and the people of Northern Ireland want to have a better health service, and that needs the plan which the new Health Minister is committed to.
Rachel Hopkins.
Does the Secretary of State agree that we wouldn't be in the final minutes of extra time as to whether Casement Park could be rebuilt in time for the Euros if the previous government had actually done something about it after we were awarded host status some year and 3 quarters ago?
Well, I agree with my honourable friend. I mean, the facts speak for themselves. A year and 3 quarters since we were awarded that wonderful opportunity to host the Euros, nothing has happened on the project.
Saoirse Eastwood.
Question number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will answer questions 3 and 9 together. The interim fiscal framework agreed earlier this year introduced a needs-based funding formula set at 124% of spending per head in England, based on the advice of the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council, and we are committed to taking forward these discussions with the Executive.
Saoirse Eastwood.
I welcome the Secretary of State to his place, and I look forward to working with him in his new role. Fixing Northern Ireland's financial framework is crucial to ensuring our public services are properly resourced and indeed impacting on my constituents of Lagan Valley. Will the Secretary of State ensure that any new arrangements are fully baselined and informed by independent expert analysis?
Well, the reason that the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council was set up was to answer the question, help to answer the question about what the need is in Northern Ireland. They came up with a range between 121 and 127% and opted for 124% in the middle. The fact that that was in the interim fiscal framework that the last government negotiated is welcome, was welcomed by the Finance Minister in Northern Ireland. We're committed to taking those discussions forward, and I understand that the Finance Minister in the Executive has already met the new Chief Secretary to the Treasury.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I also welcome the Secretary of State to his place and wish him well in the role that he now plays. The Chancellor has indicated there will be a 5% increase in the wage for health workers and for those in the education sector. Unfortunately, under the Barnett consequential, which we presently have for Northern Ireland, it means that that 5% will not mean 5% to those involved in the education sector and the health sector in Northern Ireland. So can I ask the Secretary of State this question? Will he urgently look at this issue to ensure that the health workers and the education workers in Northern Ireland deserve the same increase in their wages as they do in the mainland? Because quite clearly, I'm here for them.
Well, as the honourable gentleman will be well aware, decisions about pay in Northern Ireland are a matter for the Executive. But any additional spending in England will apply through the Barnett consequentials to Northern Ireland in the normal way.
Tony Antoniazzi.
Mr. Speaker, now I welcome the Secretary of State's commitment to needs-based funding for Northern Ireland. Does he agree that how the funding is allocated and how further revenue might be generated are matters for the devolved administration and for the Assembly?
Well, I certainly do agree, because look, all governments, and it includes the Northern Ireland Executive, has the money it's got coming in, the money it can raise in addition, and how it is going to prioritise its spending. And the Northern Ireland Executive does have more funding per head of population than in England, and it is for the Executive to take decisions about what their priorities are and to allocate the funding accordingly.
Shadow Minister Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's very kind. Can I welcome the Secretary of State and the Minister of State to their positions and thank them for their gracious phone call last week to welcome me and my right honourable friend to our positions too. On Monday, the Business Secretary slipped out a written statement rather than coming to this House, revealing that the government had decided not to proceed with an export development guarantee or emergency loans that would save Harland and Wolff despite its unique role and outstanding defence contracts. Will the Secretary of State now use their position to continue the support the last government gave to Northern Ireland and make it very clear to the Treasury that the people of Northern Ireland expect that the government should intervene in this case and support Harland and Wolff, which is desperately needed?
Well, I congratulate the honourable gentleman on his appointment. The reasons for the government's decision about Harland and Wolff were very clearly set out in the written ministerial statement that my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, laid before the House. Harland and Wolff are now talking to their main supporters, Riverstone, about potential additional financial support. We are committed to shipbuilding across the United Kingdom, including in Northern Ireland, and as that written ministerial statement made clear, Harland and Wolff is an essential part of the contract, the £1.6 billion contract for the fleet solid support ships.
Gabby Robinson.
Number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I must say I'm delighted to be appointed to this role. I look forward to working closely with executive ministers to see public services transformed in Northern Ireland, and I'll be meeting with the First and Deputy First Ministers tomorrow in Stormont, as well as with the Northern Ireland Health Minister, Mike Nesbitt.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the Minister of State and the Secretary of State to their positions. Delighted to see them in post, and I know that they are committed to seeing effective public services and stability of the institutions in Northern Ireland. But can I just caution that on the last number of responses we've received from the front bench, that we're having this recurring conversation that the fiscal framework that was announced back in December on an interim basis does not solve the problems that we have. And even the stabilisation money that was agreed back in December has already been forecast as necessary to sustain pay in Northern Ireland. Can I ask the Minister of State to engage earnestly not only in what government has been saying for the last 6 months of this Hugh and of the previous government, but to recognise that to provide good public services in Northern Ireland, we not only need to sustain but transform?
I agree with the honourable member. There's money allocated specifically for transformation of public services to improve service delivery outcomes. In Northern Ireland, 3 in 10 people are on an NHS waiting list. That number is 1 in 10 here in England. That is a figure that needs to be transformed to transform health outcomes. I will be talking about funding when I meet with executive ministers, but I would also be talking about other ways in which our doors are open, those of other ministers across the government too, in which we're determined to work together to transform public services.
Bob Blackman.
Number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will answer questions 5 and 12 together. As set out in the King's Speech, the Government is committed to repeal and replace the Legacy Act. As well as scrapping conditional immunity, we will set out steps to allow Trouble-era inquests and civil claims to resume. We will consult with all interested parties on a way forward in a way that can obtain support of victims and survivors and comply with our human rights obligations.
Bob Blackman.
Speaker, I congratulate the right honourable gentleman on his appointment and for his answer. Clearly, any delays, of course, will inbuild a legacy for the victims and their families who've waited a long time for closure on these particular issues. I understand absolutely the need to create a consensus across Northern Ireland for what is going to be proposed. But could he set out for the House the timeline and the plan for actually achieving that, and also agree to come back to the House and update the House when that plan is ready?
Well, I'm very happy to give the honourable member that assurance about keeping the House informed and reporting to it on my plans. I can say to him, as far as the Independent Commission is concerned, the Government has decided that we will retain it because the Stormont House Agreement that we say we want to return to the principles that it set out envisages both information recovery and continued investigation. Those two functions are in effect combined in the Independent Commission. I met Sir Declan Morgan yesterday to talk about how that work can be taken forward. The Commission is now open for business and it is available to families to approach to find an answer that many of them have been looking for so long.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The former member for Plymouth Moorview was a very strong advocate for veterans in Cabinet, in government. Can the right honourable gentleman assure veterans in Basildon and Billericay and across the country that any future legislation will protect now elderly veterans from vexatious legal action in the future?
Well, I pay tribute, Mr. Speaker, to the work that veterans, members of the police and the security services did over many years during the Troubles in trying to keep people safe from terrorism. And I undertake, as part of the consultation I've already set out to the House, to consult veterans' organisations.
Lockhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I welcome the Secretary of State to his position. Can the Secretary of State further outline what discussions he is having with groups and organisations who represent innocent victims, and can he assure this House that in repealing this legislation there will be no pandering to those who were the victim makers? Also, what meaningful engagement he is having with the Irish Government, who oppose the Legacy Bill but have disgracefully refused to deal with the many allegations of state collusion with the Provisional IRA, thinking specifically about the long-awaited public inquiry into the Omagh bombing.
Can I say to the honourable member, I discussed the matter with Michael Martin when I saw him very early on after my appointment, and he has expressed the hope that a way forward can be found that might lead to the withdrawal of the interstate case that they have brought. I will certainly engage with victims' organisations, a number of which I met during my time as the Shadow Secretary of State, because I am committed to trying to find a way forward that in the end, if this is going to work, it's got to work for the victims' families, because they're the people who say what went before hasn't given us what we were looking for.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. We are committed to implementing the Windsor Framework in good faith in partnership with the EU and taking all steps necessary to protect the UK internal market. We are also looking to negotiate an SBS veterinary agreement with the EU, which could help.
commit to all the provisions of the Safeguarding the Union agreement?
I already set out my answer to that in response to his honourable friend who speaks from the front bench. We are taking those commitments forward. But I would also point out to the honourable gentleman that it is by working in partnership with the European Union we can make progress, and what was achieved recently on dental amalgam is a really, really good example of precisely that.
Dr Neil Hudson.
Number 7, Mr Speaker.
I understand how important and urgent this issue is, and I'd like to thank the honourable member for his contribution to the Veterinary Medicines Working Group, the work of which we have committed to continue. There's a grace period arrangement for veterinary medicines that remains in place until the end of 2025 and provides for the continuity of supply to Northern Ireland. The Government will continue to progress the work on this issue as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Minister for her answer. The Windsor framework secured by the previous government extended that grace period to veterinary medicines in Northern Ireland till the end of December 2025. This includes vaccines and anaesthetics, so it's vital for biosecurity and both animal and public health that access continues. Can the Minister assure the House that the Government will strain every sinew to secure permanent access to veterinary medicines in Northern Ireland? And will they continue with the Cabinet Office Veterinary Medicines Working Group on which I sat that was working so hard to find a solution?
I thank the honourable member, and I can confirm again that that Veterinary Medicines Working Group will continue. We recognise its importance, and we will continue to work at pace on the long-term solution, because that continuity of supply and knowing that well in advance of December next year is very important.
The then spokesperson Wendy Chamberlain.
Mr Speaker, may I welcome the Secretary of State and his team to their place. May I also associate myself with the remarks of the Honourable Member for Belfast South and Mid Down. I can only hope the success of the hurling being shown at the weekend means that the BBC will consider the Shinty Hurling International that takes place every year. I welcome attempts by the new government to continue to rebuild trust with Northern Ireland political parties and also to improve relations with the European Union. It offers that opportunity to reduce frictions in trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So, Mr Speaker, can the Secretary of State set out what he is doing with ministerial colleagues and other departments to open the doors to securing a veterinary agreement with the EU, which will further reduce those barriers to trade?
The Government is committed to working at pace on a long-term solution, including a veterinary agreement. This may change the relationship with the EU and build more trust, and so a bespoke agreement may be needed, but we are working at pace to secure this.
Dr Alison Gold.
Question number 8, Mr Speaker.
Thank you very much indeed. With permission, Mr Speaker, I will answer questions 8 and 14 together. A fortnight ago, the Minister and I met the Taoiseach Michael Martin in Hillsborough, where we discussed strengthening relations between our two governments, given the importance of our relationship with Ireland. The Prime Minister and the Taoiseach also held a bilateral meeting ahead of the European political community last week.
Dr Alison Gold.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and may I also thank Secretary of State for his answer. Duchess China, which I believe, Mr Speaker, are the suppliers of your very excellent commemorative China service, is based in my constituency, Stoke-on-Trent South. The Republic of Ireland is an important export market for the company, and Northern Ireland is an important part of its domestic market. Can the Minister tell us how relations across the Irish Sea and Northern Ireland island borders be enhanced for the benefit of companies like Duchess China?
Well, I congratulate my honourable friend on the company that she mentions and the products that it produces. We are committed to protecting the integrity of the UK internal market, so that great firms in Great Britain and in Northern Ireland are able to sell right across the United Kingdom and internationally. And for Northern Ireland in particular, it has extraordinary opportunities and so much potential, which we now need to build on. One of the most important contributions the Executive can make is to ensure executive stability, because that's what investors are looking for.
Emily Darlington.
Can I congratulate the very honourable member on his position and hope that he will be able to rebuild those relations that have been strained through the Brexit process. I'd like to ask my question, very much like my colleague, about small and medium-sized businesses in Milton Keynes Central that have had to go under because of the additional paperwork and other restrictions through our strained relations now with the EU. Can he confirm with me that he is talking to the Irish government and others about how we reduce those barriers to trade?
Well, there is no doubt that the change in our trading relationship with the European Union has brought additional costs and paperwork for businesses, whether they are selling to the EU or into Northern Ireland. The Windsor Framework is the means by which we are trying to manage that. And I supported the Windsor Framework, negotiated by the previous government, because it represented an important and a significant step forward. But the reason why we have to continue to implement it is because if we're going to get the veterinary and SPS agreement and other agreements we are seeking with the European Union...
We've still got others.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Anglo-Irish agreement is absolutely vital, and the meeting between the Prime Minister and the Taoiseach was to be welcomed. Prime Ministerial diaries become very full. Will he use his good offices to make sure that that dialogue between Taoiseach and Prime Minister continue, to build on that relationship, to see it flourish still further?
I can indeed give that assurance, and my right honourable friend has agreed there will be an annual summit.
Final question, Gregory Campbell.
In discussions with the Irish Government, does he agree with me that ensuring that they understand that the vast majority of people in Northern Ireland, whether they consider themselves to be British, Irish or Northern Irish, can see that there's a United Kingdom context that allows them that diversity, and that improving the lives of existing generations is the best way to preserve the lives of everyone for the future?
I join with the honourable gentleman in that commitment to improving the lives of the people of Northern Ireland. That is something that we as a government are committed to work on with him and all of his colleagues in Northern Ireland.
Can I welcome the Prime Minister Leader of the Opposition and all new members to the first questions to the Prime Minister, and in which case we're going to start with Callum Miller.
Question 1, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know the whole House will be shocked by the news that a soldier has been attacked in Kent. Our thoughts are with him, his family and our armed forces who serve to keep us safe. We wish him a swift recovery. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, the whole House will also want to join me in wishing Team GB good luck as they travel to Paris for the Olympic Games. Yeah. And Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others discussing how this government will bring about the change the country has decisively voted for. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings today.
I begin by welcoming the Prime Minister to his first questions as Prime Minister. I also associate myself with his remarks about the soldier in Kent and, of course, my wishes to the British Olympians. At Coombe, in my constituency, Thames Water has pumped sewage into the River Evenlode for over 2,600 hours in the last year. Thames Water was allowed by Ofwat to withdraw £7 billion in dividends, yet now wants to jack up my constituents' bills. I welcome the water bill in the King's speech, but would the Prime Minister agree with my constituents and me that the system is broken? And will he now commit to scrapping Ofwat and replacing it with a tougher regulator that will finally put people and planet ahead of water company profits?
Yeah. Can I welcome the honourable member to his place and thank him for raising this important issue in relation to water. And customers should not pay the price for the mismanagement by water companies, and we've already announced immediate steps to put water companies under tougher regime, and the Minister for Water will meet the bosses of failing companies to hold them to account for their performance. After 14 years of failure with our rivers and beaches, it falls to this government of service to fix the mess of the failure of the last 14 years.
Nadia Whitson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the Prime Minister to his place. Mr. Speaker, many young trans people and their families are extremely concerned about the restrictions on puberty blockers implemented by the last government. One of my constituents, a parent of a trans child, told me, "I'm so worried about my child. I'm terrified for what this means for them and where Britain is going on these issues." Will the Prime Minister meet with young trans people, their families and organisations supporting them, so that he can hear why they feel so strongly that these restrictions must be reversed?
Can I welcome the honourable friend back to her place? Our guiding principles must be the well-being of children. And this is a serious government, and we will approach that question with care, not inflammatory dividing lines. The CAS review was clear that there's not enough evidence on the long-term impact of puberty blockers to know if they're safe. And the Health Secretary will consult with organisations supporting young people and families, and I will ensure that there is a meeting with her and the relevant minister as soon as that can be arranged.
Now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Rishi Sunak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join with the Prime Minister in expressing my shock at the attack on a British soldier? Our thoughts are with him and his family as we wish him a speedy recovery. And I also join with the Prime Minister in his warm words about our Olympic athletes. I've no doubt that after years of training, focus and dedication, they'll bring back many gold medals. Although, to be honest, I'm probably not the first person they want to hear advice from on how to win. But I'm glad in our exchanges. I'm glad, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm glad in our exchanges so far we have maintained a cross-party consensus on important matters of foreign policy. And in that spirit today, I wanted to focus our exchange on Ukraine and national security. The UK has consistently been the first country to provide new capabilities to Ukraine, such as the long-range weapons that have been used so effectively in the Black Sea. Now, those decisions aren't easy, and I was grateful to the Prime Minister for his support as I made those decisions in government. And in opposition, I offer that same support to him. So can I ask that he continues to be responsive to Ukraine's new requests so that they don't just stand still, but can decisively win out against Russian aggression?
Can I thank the Leader of the Opposition for not only raising the question of Ukraine, but doing it in a way which can maintain the unity across this House, which has been so important to the Ukrainian people. And I can assure him that we are, of course, talking to Ukraine about how they deal with the Russian aggression that they are facing, have been facing for many, many months. And I will continue to try to do that in the way that he did, which is to reach out across the House to share such information as we can to maintain the unity that is so important.
I thank him for that response. Now, I also found that one of the UK's key roles as Ukraine's closest ally is to encourage other countries to follow our lead in providing new military capabilities. And in that vein, when he saw Chancellor Scholz recently, I'm sure he thanked him for the considerable air defence that the Germans are providing the Ukrainians. But did he also raise with him the issue of the Germans perhaps providing long-range missiles, just as the UK, America and France have now done?
I had the opportunity in Washington at the NATO Council to talk to our German counterparts. There was a strong theme there on Ukraine, discussed with all of our allies, and part of my message was to urge all of our allies to provide further support where they can to the Ukrainian people, and that was well received, and there was unity coming out of the NATO Council. That's what we must all do.
I'm glad to hear the Prime Minister raise at the NATO summit as well, because I very much welcome the message that came out loud and clear from that summit, and indeed the Prime Minister's words from the dispatch box on Monday about Ukraine's irreversible path to NATO membership. And so does he agree with me that fatuous Russian claims on Ukrainian territory must not act as a block to Ukraine joining the NATO defensive alliance?
I wholeheartedly agree, and it is for NATO allies to decide who is a member of NATO, formed 75 years ago, a proud and probably most successful alliance that's ever been formed, and that's why it was really important at the summit that we were able to say there is now this irreversible path to membership. That's a step forward from a year ago, and President Zelensky was very pleased that we've been able to make that successful transition.
The opposition.
Thanks to the complex legal and diplomatic work that the UK has led over the past several months, together with our allies Canada and America, the Prime Minister will, I hope, now find that there is a sound and established legal basis to go further on sanctions and seize Russian assets and use them to fund Ukrainian reconstruction. Now, that work has taken time, but I hope he is able to take a look at it. And can he confirm for the House that this work is something that he will take forward? Because if he does, I can assure him that the opposition will support him in doing so.
Again, I'm grateful for this opportunity to say how united we were on the question of sanctions across this House. The use now made of what has been seized and frozen is an important issue on which I think we can move forward. And I know the Chancellor is already beginning to have some discussions about how we can take more effective measures. Again, I will seek to reach out across the House as we do this important work together.
The opposite.
I very much welcome the Prime Minister's response, but I also welcome both his and the Defence Secretary's recent emphasis on the importance of the Tempest fighter jet programme. It's a crucial sovereign capability, as he mentioned, and important for our alliances with Italy and Japan. Furthermore, however, other countries also wish to participate. And in government, we had begun initial productive discussions with our friend and ally Saudi Arabia about their desire to potentially join the programme. So could the Prime Minister confirm that he will continue those initial positive conversations with Saudi Arabia? And again, I can assure him that he will have our support in doing so.
Well, let me make this absolutely clear. This is a really important programme. Significant progress has already been made, and we want to build on that progress. And I've had some initial discussions, not least in Farnborough, where I was just a few days ago.
Leader of the Opposition.
Finally, Mr. Speaker, can I just say that in the dangerous and uncertain world that we now sadly live in, I know firsthand how important it is that our Prime Minister can use his prerogative power to quickly respond militarily to protect British national security, sometimes without giving this House prior notice. Now, these are perhaps the most difficult decisions that a Prime Minister can take, and I welcomed his support when I made them. And I want to take this opportunity to assure him of the opposition's support if he deems it necessary to take similar action in the future. So does he agree with me that whilst the use of the prerogative power is sometimes politically controversial, it is essential to ensure the safety and security of the British people?
I agree it's essential, and our security is the first duty of government. I was grateful to the Leader of the Opposition for reaching out when action had to be taken to me personally to ensure that I was briefed on the sensitive issues that lay behind the decisions that he had to take. And as I mentioned to him last week, I will endeavour to ensure that we proceed in the same way so that he has access to all the information that he needs to come to a determination, which I hope will be, to be able to support the position that this government takes. Thank you.
Kim Ledbeach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and welcome back. Can I congratulate the Prime Minister on such a positive start to his premiership and on resetting the dial on politics as public service, as a force and as a force for good. Irrespective of our different views and opinions in this chamber and beyond, it's a very important message. And as such, would he join me in wishing the very best of luck to the 83 cyclists who have set off from West Yorkshire this morning on the 9th Joe Cox Way bike ride, travelling 280 miles down the country to London, celebrating all that we have in common through the power of cycling, including, sadly for the cyclists, probably quite a lot of sore legs and aching muscles.
Of course I will wish them good luck. I admire them. I'm not sure I envy them. It's 280 miles. But it's a brilliant cause, and the whole House, I think, misses our dear friend Jo. And I know that she would have been incredibly proud to have seen this government in place and would have played a big part in it. And, you know, I'd like to welcome my honourable friend back to her place. And I know that she will continue in Jo's spirit with the same dedication and determination. And I think I'm right in saying that her parents, and of course Jo's parents, are with us in the gallery today to see this first PMQs. We will always have more in common than that which divides us.
It comes to the Leader of the Lib Dems, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I welcome the Prime Minister to his place at his first Prime Minister's questions? And can I associate myself and my party with the comments he made about the appalling attack on the soldier in Kent? And our thoughts are with his family and friends and comrades. And can I also associate our side with his comments on Team GP and particularly talk about how we want them to succeed in Paris? The Prime Minister has many messes that he's inherited. One of them is the scandal over the carers' allowance repayments. An example is my constituent, Andrea, who is a full-time carer for her elderly mum. She went back to work part-time, mainly for her mental health, she tells me. She was earning less than £7,000 a year and has been hit by a bill from the DWP for £4,600. But Andrea is just one of tens of thousands of carers facing these repayments, punished for working and earning just a few more pounds than the earnings limit. So will the Prime Minister agree to meet with me and other family carers to try to resolve this matter?
Yeah. Can I thank the honourable member for raising this? And he, of course, has been a tireless advocate for carers. And I don't think any of us could be other than moved when we saw the video of him and his son that was put out during the election campaign. He talks about Team GB. I'm glad he's in a suit today because we're more used to seeing him in a wetsuit. But in relation to this issue, look, we have a more severe crisis than we thought as we go through the books of the last 14 years. We must review the challenges. I know they don't like it. They don't like it. There was a reason the electorate rejected them so profoundly. So we'll review the challenges that we face. We do want to work with the sector and where we can across the House to create a national care service covering all these aspects. And we'll start with carers and those that work in the care sector with a fair pay agreement. But I'm very happy to work across the House with all the people that care so passionately about this particular issue.
Fred David.
The Prime Minister's response. I hope he will look at this matter, though, on carers' allowance. Family carers save the taxpayer £162 billion a year. And if you get this right, many could go back into work. But there's another care crisis that's probably even bigger, and that's the crisis in social care. I'm sure, like me, he's met millions of people around the country, heard about millions of people for whom this is their biggest issue and has been for decades. After a once-in-a-century election, does he not think there's an opportunity for a once-in-a-century chance to fix social care and thus help our NHS? So can I ask him to set up a cross-party commission on social care so we can address this urgent matter?
He's right, it is a crisis. I'm sorry to have to report to the House it's not the only crisis that we've inherited. There's a crisis of failure absolutely everywhere after 14 years of failure that this government of service will begin the hard yards of fixing, including on social care. We will work across the House. We do endeavour to create a national care service. That will not be easy, but we can begin the first steps, and we will share that across the House where we can.
I'm a little bit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. For decades, my constituent, Jack Taylor, has been continuously ignored by previous governments. He and other nuclear veterans have been denied access to their medical records and compensation. The Prime Minister has rightly said these national heroes deserve full accountability and justice. Will he therefore consider supporting a special tribunal with statutory powers into this 70-year-long scandal?
Can I first express my gratitude to the service personnel who participated in the British nuclear testing programme. It is right that I think nearly 5,000 now have got the nuclear test medals in recognition of their service, and the veterans have the right to apply for no-fault compensation under the War Pensions Scheme. And I will ensure on this issue a meeting is arranged for her with the relevant minister.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr Speaker, may I again warmly congratulate the Prime Minister on ending Tory rule. In his campaign to do so, he was, of course... They're too close for comfort now. They're too close for comfort. In his campaign to do so, Mr Speaker, he was, of course, joined by Gordon Brown. And just 5 days before the general election in Scotland, on the front page of the Daily Record, Gordon Brown instructed voters to vote Labour to end child poverty. Yet last night, Labour MPs from Scotland were instructed to retain the two-child cap, which forces children into poverty. So, Prime Minister, what changed?
I'm glad he mentioned Gordon Brown, because the last Labour government lifted millions of children out of poverty, something we're very, very proud of. And this government will approach the question with the same vigour with our new task force. Already we've taken steps: breakfast clubs, abolishing no-fault evictions, decent home standard.
Order. Props are not allowed to be used. Never mind, put it down. We don't need any more. Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, already we've set up a task force to put that vigour in place. 3 breakfast clubs in every primary school, abolishing no-fault eviction, decent home standard, Awab's law, and a plan to make work pay. But I would just say this: before he lectures everyone else, he should explain why, since the SNP came to power, there are 30,000 more children in poverty in Scotland.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I'm pleased to see the government's swift action in officially calling for an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages, a rapid increase of humanitarian aid into Gaza, the restoration of funds to UNRWA, the commitment to complying with potential ICC arrest warrants, and to recognising a Palestinian state. But too many innocent people are still dying every day. There is nowhere safe in Gaza. So what further pressure can the Prime Minister apply to bring about an urgent ceasefire?
Both the Foreign Secretary and I have set out the urgent need for a ceasefire to Prime Minister Netanyahu. We want a pathway to a two-state solution, a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable sovereign Palestinian state. And I used my first overseas trip as Prime Minister, particularly at NATO, to raise this with world leaders. And under a Labour government, this subject will be discussed, negotiated and fought for at the highest levels on the world stage. The alternative is standing on street corners protesting. Ultimately, only one of those will deliver change.
Jordan.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I congratulate the Prime Minister and welcome to his place. And I'm sure he will want to reassure the many parents and teachers in Edinburgh West who've expressed concerns about the implication for our state education system in Scotland of the VAT increase in independent fees, which he proposes. Edinburgh City Council, led by the Labour Party, have produced 5-year projections which show we do not have capacity in the city to accommodate pupils who may leave the independent sector. Moreover, how will he ensure that the VAT raised in Scotland from those fees can be reinvested in already hard-pressed Scottish education?
I do obviously understand the aspiration that parents who work hard and save hard have for their children that they send to private schools. But every parent has that aspiration, whichever school they go to. And I am determined that we will have the right teachers in place in our state secondary schools to ensure that every child, wherever they come from, whatever their background, has the same opportunity. And I do not apologise for that.
Mr Speaker, I welcome last week's announcement this government will be introducing a new publicly owned company, Great British Energy. This will be critical to ensure this country's energy security while meeting our climate goals and lowering energy bills. Will the Prime Minister make assurances to communities up and down the country that they will benefit from good skilled jobs and opportunities that Great British Energy promises to unlock?
Yes, and I'm really pleased that Great British Energy will be owned by and for the British people. investing in the energy systems of the future. That means cheaper bills. Renewables are cheaper. It means security, so Putin can't put his boot on our throat, and it means the next generation of jobs for years to come. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has achieved something that we didn't think would be possible in such a short period of time. In less than 3 weeks, he has had a significant rebellion and he has suspended 7 of his members of Parliament, all for standing up for child poverty. This from a Labour government. The headlines are awful for the Prime Minister this morning. Poverty campaigners are furious with the Prime Minister. Is his honeymoon over before it's even begun?
Having left for the election campaign with quite a significant number of SNP members and come back with a small handful, I really don't think lectures on what the electorate in Scotland are thinking. If you look at I'm very proud of our Scottish Labour MPs on this side of the House. And I simply repeat the point I made to his leader. Perhaps the SNP needs to account for the 30,000 extra children in poverty in Scotland. Thank you.
Dan Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The previous Conservative government cut the funding for the police in London by 1/3, taking £1 billion out of the budgets for London's policing and forcing the closure of both of the police stations in the Chipping Barnet constituency. Does the Prime Minister agree with me on the importance of our police stations and in the need to rebuild local policing?
Can I welcome my honourable friend to his place, the first ever Labour MP for Chipping Barnet, and I know he will serve his constituency with pride. And our guarantee will put 13,000 extra neighbourhood officers and PCSOs back on Britain's streets, and that's a fully funded plan. He's right to say that the last government absolutely hammered police numbers, and he will have seen the impact of that in his constituency. And it is telling that the former Justice Secretary said at the weekend that that could perhaps have been done differently. And I'm glad to see the people of Chipping Barnet agree with that assessment and returned him for that constituency.
Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Great Yarmouth have little doubt that uncontrolled legal and illegal immigration since 1997 has damaged and disrupted their community and undermined their public services. Does the Prime Minister agree that importing millions of people with no thought whatsoever to the brutal consequences has failed our country? I know the good people of Great Yarmouth would much appreciate a yes or no answer to this straightforward question.
I'm not sure I agree with his numbers, but look, I do think that it's serious that the previous government lost control of our borders. Record numbers have crossed the Channel. Since the Leader of the Opposition, when he was Prime Minister for 18 months, 50,000 people crossed the Channel. It's a serious issue that requires a serious answer. And that is why we will set up our Border Security Command to take down the gangs that are running this vile trade. What we won't do is waste further time on a gimmick that cost a fortune and remove just 4 volunteers.
Bill Esterson.
The Liverpool City region has one of the biggest concentrations of offshore wind in the world. 100,000 homes could be powered through the Mersey Tidal project. Yet some members opposite want to block the jobs, the lower bills and the energy security from renewable energy. So can I encourage my right honourable friend to resist the siren voices opposite and support a range of technologies, including the Mersey Tidal project, to maximise the benefits of clean energy for our country?
Well, clean energy is at the heart of this mission-driven government. Boosting homegrown renewable energy is the best way to create new jobs give us energy independence and lower bills for good. And that's why we'll be changing the planning rules to make sure that we can get Britain building again. And not just the houses, but everything that we need, including prisons, by the way, and to make sure we can deal with the mess that we have inherited. I'm pleased to hear of the viable projects that are being advanced, such as the Mersey Tidal project, and we'll look at them carefully.
Lewis Clocking.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a privilege to be the first Conservative member to ask the new Prime Minister a question at PMQs. Can the Prime Minister assure me and my constituents in Broxbourne that they will not just have a say, but a meaningful say over new development in the Greenbelt in their area?
Can I welcome the honourable member to his place and be clear, we intend to get Britain building. We will change the planning regime in order to do so. It's held us back for far too long. Young people have not been able to own a home until they're way past the age of 35, denying them the basic dream of home ownership. Of course, we will work with communities, but we will take the tough decisions that the last government ran away from.
Prime Minister, we've got much to be proud of in Ipswich, from a thriving arts and culture scene to beautiful parks and a stunning waterfront. Unlike our friends over the border in Norfolk, we also now have a Premier League football team again. Prime Minister is very welcome to join when Arsenal come visit next year. Despite all those positives, though, after the last 14 years, our town centre is really struggling and desperately needs help. Can the Prime Minister set out to this House the steps he will take to revive town centres like Ipswich?
Can I again welcome my honourable friend to his place? Congratulate Ipswich on their promotion, though not on, I think it's Boxing Day when they visit Arsenal. I'm going to resist the temptation that he puts in front of me to choose between Ipswich and Norwich. But on town centres, he's right that we need vibrant high streets. We need to make the change that we've voted in to bring about, and that's why we will replace the business rate system to level the playing field, and we will absolutely address regional inequality through our local growth plans.
Jim Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK is one of the most nature-depleted countries on Earth, so I welcome the government's signal that it's committed to nature recovery. This is critical to humanity's future, as it affects everything from food security to public health and well-being. Please could the Prime Minister tell us how he'll show leadership personally on this existential issue, and in particular, will he attend the 16th Biodiversity COP later this year, and will the UK government be launching a bid to host a future UN Nature Summit?
We are committed to nature recovery. It's a really important issue that this government will tackle. And he talks about leadership, and I'd ask him to show some, because it's extraordinary that, elected to this House as a Green politician, he's opposing vital clean energy infrastructure in his own constituency. So I ask him, we will put the plans before this House, I ask him to back those plans.
Joe Powell.
Mr. Speaker, on Sunday night at a community event in North Kensington, attended by hundreds of people, 15-year-old Renee Graham was shot and killed in a senseless act of violence, and my heart goes out to his family and the wider community that is feeling anxious, frightened and shocked. Can the Prime Minister ensure that North Kensington gets support from this government at this difficult time, and can he outline what measures the government will take to tackle gun violence and prevent young lives like Renee's being taken in the future?
I welcome my honourable friend to his place and thank him for raising this awful case. The loss of a teenage boy in West London is shocking, and our thoughts, and I'm sure I speak for the whole House, are with his family and friends. I do urge the public to support the Metropolitan Police with any information which could help in their investigation, which is ongoing. Making streets safer is one of the 5 central missions of this government, and this is a shocking reminder of just how important that mission is. And we have an ambition to drive down this sort of violence in our communities. We do not want interventions like this as we've had over the last few years, and it is shocking to hear of this particular incident.
Vickers.
The last government invested massively in Teesside, most recently committing £1 billion to improving transport in our area. That money will protect the future of our iconic transporter bridge, upgrade Thornaby train station, create a new transport hub at Teesside Park and much, much more. Can the Prime Minister confirm, are we still getting our £1 billion, or is Labour turning its back on Teesside?
Well, he talks about turning its back. I think he's the sole remaining Tory MP in the North East or Teesside. I've already taken an early opportunity to make our commitment clear to the plans that we need for economic growth across the country, working with all the mayors who are in place, including those who wear a different rosette, and that's the way in which we will take this forward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a week where the National Police Chiefs Council have declared violence against women and girls a national emergency, Sky News has today published appalling accounts of sexual harassment and violence against women paramedics. Can the Prime Minister please update the House on progress towards the mission board to finally tackle this scourge in our society?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for raising this, because it is such a serious issue. And we have made a commitment, a mission to halve violence against women and girls. Mr. Speaker, I know from my own experience dealing with these cases as a prosecutor and subsequently just how hard that will be to achieve. It does mean that we'll have to deliver in a different way. We'll have to roll up our sleeves and do difficult things that haven't been done in the past. And in answer to the specific question, we've started work already on the delivery board, and I look forward to updating her and the House on the progress that we're making on this really important issue.
Final questions to Roger Gale.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Another Freudian slip. The old dog is off the leash. Mr. Speaker, could I first thank both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition for their supportive policies in relation to Ukraine. Their expressions today will have been of great comfort to the thousands of Ukrainian residents in the United Kingdom who simply wish to return to their lawful homes. Further to the answer given to my honourable friend, the member for Broxbourne, can the Prime Minister tell the House how he's planning reforms which will smother fields in East Kent currently yielding bread-making wheat with houses is compatible with his own Secretary of State for Agriculture's desire to achieve sustainability?
Thank you for that question. We have to get economic growth in this country. We've had failure over the last 14 years, and the failure on economic growth has been central to it. There's been failure to build the infrastructure we need, the houses we need, the prisons we need, and I think the whole House can see the consequence of that. We've got prison overcrowding, where emergency measures have had to be taken because the building of prisons hasn't kept pace with the sentencing of those to prisons. We've got housing crisis, where the dream of home ownership for most young people is simply gone under the previous government. To be over the age of 35 before you can get a secure roof over your head of your own is a huge dash of dreams. We're not going to listen to the party opposite. They put their case to the electorate. The electorate rejected them profoundly. And my advice would be, having sat at that dispatch box for 4.5 long years, is when you get rejected that profoundly by the electorate, it's best not to go back to the electorate and tell them that they were wrong. It's best to reflect and change your approach and change your party.
That completes questions. We'll let the front benches change over.
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, James Cleverly.
Mr. Speaker, the newly elected honourable member for Chipping Barnet, in his question to the Prime Minister, made what I'm certain, is an inadvertent inaccuracy in his claims about the funding of the Metropolitan Police, which is both in absolute terms and per capita the best funded force, and where £62 million was offered to the Mayor of London to fund, which he failed to utilise for lack of recruitment. My broader point is, can advice be given to newer members, or indeed returning members if this is the case, on how to correct the record when they make an erroneous claim on the floor of the House?
Well, first of all, I think he's also put on record his views. What I would say is we're not going to continue the debate, and it's up to individual members to correct the record if there has been an error in what has been said. Right, we're now going to move on. Motion number 1, immunities and privileges. I call the Minister to move the motion. Catherine.
I beg to move, Mr. Speaker, that this House approves the Global Air Combat Programme International Government Organisation Immunities and Privileges Order 2024, copies of which were laid before the House on the 23rd of May 2024. It's my pleasure, as Minister for the Indo-Pacific and the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, to respond on behalf of the Government. In December 2022, the UK, Japan and Italy launched the Global Combat Air Programme, known as the GCAP, to deliver a next-generation aircraft by 2035. The Prime Minister reaffirmed the UK's commitment to promoting cooperation and collaboration between the UK and Italy on July 5th, with the Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, and between the UK and Japan on July the 6th, with the Prime Minister of Japan, Minister Kishida Fumio, concurring too in the call with Japan that the security of the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific is indivisible. His Majesty's Government is committed to ensuring the security of the Indo-Pacific, working closely with our allies. For the UK, this aircraft will sit at the heart of a wider system, networked and collaborating with a range of wider air, including the F-35 and broader military capabilities. It will use information systems, weapons and uncrewed collaborative combat air platforms to complete the capability. Replacing the capability provided by Typhoon, this system will sustain the UK's operational advantage. In addition, GCAP will attract investment in research and development into digital design and advanced manufacture processes, providing opportunities for our next generation of highly skilled engineers and technicians. The signing of the... I'll continue if he allows. The signing of the Convention on the Establishment of GCAP International Government Organisation, known commonly as GIGO by the parties of the UK, Japan and Italy, took place in December 2023 and was conducted by the respective Defence Secretaries of the three nations. The GIGO will function as the executive body with the legal capacity to place contracts with industrial partners engaged in the GCAP. Through the GIGO, the UK will lead on the development of an innovative stealth fighter jet with supersonic capability and equipped with cutting-edge technology, and facilitate collaboration with key international partners, which raise the profile of the UK's combat air industrial capacity. The GIGO headquarters will be based in the UK, employing personnel from the UK, Italy and Japan. The Chief Exec and the Director posts shall be filled by nationals of different parties according to a mechanism that shall preserve a balance between the parties. Given the nature of the GIGO and an international defence organisation, the Ministry of Defence, with support from the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, has been leading on trilateral engagement and negotiations on this establishment. The Convention, once in effect, will enable closer collaboration between the parties, being the Government of Japan, Government of Italy and the UK Government, and support the development of His Majesty's Government's defence capabilities, stimulated by development of the UK-based headquarters. It will enable further collaboration with key industry partners, with the headquarters supporting hundreds of jobs and working in close partnership with Rolls-Royce, Leonardo UK and MBDA UK, and with hundreds of other companies from across the UK in the supply chain to deliver the GCAP. I'm coming to an end, and then there's 90 minutes for debate. This order in Council is a statutory instrument and forms part of the secondary legislation needed to confer legal capacity and privileges and immunities on the GCAP International Government Organisation and accords certain privileges and immunities to the organisation's personnel and the representatives of the parties to the Convention. This order was laid in draft before Parliament on the 23rd of May 2024.
Can I just clarify, it's not my decision whether to intervene. It is actually up to the Minister. And normally I would say that if a Shadow Secretary of State, but it is also up to the Minister where she does give way. Minister Catherine West.
If he wants to say something, I'd be very happy following your advice, Mr. Speaker.
I am very grateful to the Honourable Lady. Can she confirm that there will be no delay to the current planned spending this year on GCAP by the Ministry of Defence?
This instrument today, to be clear to members, new and old, is the legal framework which the programme will sit within. This hasn't got specific funding recommendations attached to it because it's the scaffolding, if you like, it's the nest within which all the work will happen. This order was laid in draft before Parliament on the 23rd of May 2024, is subject to the affirmative procedure and will be made by the Privy Council once it is approved by both Houses. Subject to approval and ratification, the treaty would enter into force on the deposit of the last instrument of ratification or acceptance of the parties. This is anticipated to be in autumn 2024 to meet the 2035 in-service date. This order confers a bespoke set of privileges and immunities to enable the GIGO to operate effectively in the UK. The Government considers these privileges and immunities both necessary and appropriate to deliver on the interests and commitments that the UK has towards the organisation.
I'm not a minister, but I was for 3 years.
As he has so much experience in the Defence Select Committee, I'm very happy to take his point.
I thank the Minister for giving way. She's a Foreign Office Minister, I believe, heading this up, not a Defence Minister, which is interesting, but it is an international agreement. Can she tell the House, because of the threat to the programme from the Defence Review, has she had any representations from the Japanese government or the Italian government, our two other major programmes, to express their concern about any threat to GCAP?
The honourable member asks an important question, and I can confirm that this is the legal framework around which the programme will sit. And I can also confirm that the Defence Secretary yesterday met with his Japanese counterparts at the show, and they were able to have further interesting discussions, and I'm sure that he will be able to continue that questioning once he is, I'm sure, once again a member of the Defence Select Committee in the autumn.
To the Minister for giving way. Many jobs in our constituencies depend on contracts with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is also interested in GCAP. What conversations have been had with Saudi Arabia around this, particularly in the light of the procrastination by the Prime Minister on this programme, which has been reaffirmed, if I'm honest, by the Honourable Lady today in her remarks?
Right honourable and gallant member asks a very important question, but there's been no procrastination. That within the month of being elected, we've got the legal framework to the House of Commons for a debate, and I think that is expediting all the important organisational arrangements so that this programme can proceed at pace. And he talks of procrastination, and I think after 14 years, I'm sure he is a master in procrastination if he was part of the last government. The privileges and immunities conferred on agency personnel and representatives are not for their personal advantage, but in order to ensure complete independence in the exercise of their functions in connection with the GCAP. To be clear, agency personnel have no personal immunity if they commit a crime, and there is a clear carve-out ensuring that they have no immunity in any vehicle incident. These immunities in respect of the GIGO cover immunity from suit and legal process, inviolability of premises and archives, and appropriate tax exemptions and reliefs in relation to its official activities. In respect of the representatives of the parties and staff, the provisions cover functional immunity and an immunity waiver. Additionally, the order also includes an exemption from the legal suit and process immunity in the case of a motor traffic accident or damage caused by a motor vehicle. This is a standard clause included in statutory instruments and treaties providing for privileges and immunities. In conclusion, The support for the GIGO's establishment ensured through this order is a unique opportunity to showcase UK leadership and innovation in the Air Force defence industry on a global stage. Through the GIGO, the UK will lead on the development of an innovative stealth fighter jet with supersonic capability and equipped with cutting-edge technology, and facilitate collaboration with key international partners which raise the profile of the UK's combat air industrial capacity. And
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much? There's much to be welcomed in the Minister's statement today. In an introduction at the very beginning, she referred to a number of aircraft companies across the whole of the United Kingdom who will be involved. My understanding, and maybe the Minister can confirm this, that Spirit will also be aerospace will be involved in that as well. I just want to confirm that that is the case. And if it is the case, it means that when it comes to the jobs and the opportunities that everybody in this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland will benefit. Perhaps the Minister could confirm if that's the case. Thank you so much.
Obviously, the specifics in terms of the supply chain, etc., is not really part of today's order. However, we are aware that it is a very important part of our industrial puzzle, and I'm sure that there will be some knock-on benefits for Northern Ireland, which I know he is a fierce defender of jobs and opportunities for that wonderful place. Let me end by saying the first duty of government is to keep the country safe. Under the government, defence will be central to both the UK's security and to our economic prosperity and growth, including by harnessing the strength of our well-established defence industry. The GIGO is key to the GCAP, and the UK government continues to make positive progress with our partners, Japan and Italy, and I commend this order to the House.
The question is, as on the order paper, I now call the Shadow Secretary of State, James Cottage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Grateful to respond to the statutory instrument. Can I begin by associating the Shadow Defence team with the remarks by the Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition about this terrible attack in Kent on a British soldier? Our thoughts are with his family. I can confirm that we support the measures before us and recognise that they are necessary to deliver into law the administrative governance for the Global Combat Air Programme, GCAP. Whilst this is a Foreign Office measure today, the SI was prepared with strong input from the Ministry of Defence, which I can confirm as it certainly crossed my desk when I was Minister for Defence Procurement. May I put on record that it was a great honour to serve as Defence Procurement Minister with significant responsibility in relation to GCAP, Mr. Speaker, and alongside the two previous Secretaries of State, Ben Wallace and Grant Shapps. In particular, it was a privilege to engage with our international GCAP partners from Italy and Japan, whom I had the pleasure to host last September in Lancaster House for trilateral discussions. This is not just about delivering UK military capability in the crucial area of combat air, but doing so to the benefit of two great partners, and in the case of Japan, one that faces the threat of China and Russia right on its doorstep. Since that trilateral, the project has achieved significant goals. Not least the signing of the international treaty last December that we are legislating for today, a treaty that establishes the legal basis for the formation of a new GCAP international organisation, the GIGO. I'm delighted we're able to agree that the international HQ of the GIGO will be in the UK, but in keeping with the spirit of equal partnership that underpins GCAP, with the first chief executives of the GCAP agency and joint venture respectively being from Italy and Japan. As such, the SI before us effectively enables this international treaty to enter into effect, with further important measures on immunity and privileges that are necessary for the effective operation of the GIGO. All that said, Mr. Speaker, while this SI is necessary to deliver GCAP's governance arrangements, it will not directly deliver a single aircraft. Alongside this SI, we need the government to wholeheartedly back the GCAP programme, ensuring that it has the funding necessary to deliver our sixth-generation fighter capability. Indeed, it would be quite extraordinary for the government to ask us as a House to approve these regulations if we were at the same time seriously contemplating scrapping UK involvement in GCAP. And yet, that prospect has figured prominently in the press in recent days, for whilst the best of British defence aviation has been gathered at Riyadh and Farnborough, incredibly, the government has not been able to repeat the previous wholehearted backing of GCAP that it gave prior to the general election. In responding to the statement from his predecessor Grant Shapps on December the 18th last year, when he confirmed trilateral agreement for the GCAP treaty, the now Secretary of State said, when he was in my role as Shadow,
He said, developing a sixth-generation fighter will ensure that we can continue to safeguard our UK skies and those of our NATO allies for decades to come. It will inspire innovation, strengthen UK industry and keep Britain at the cutting edge of defence technology. I totally agree with his remarks. Yet fast forward to the present, and as we heard just now at Prime Minister's questions, the Prime Minister is only able to say that the programme is important. Meanwhile, the Minister for the Armed Forces, with great respect, he's on the front bench, and I do have great respect for him personally, when he was asked, he said, it is not right for me to prejudge what might happen in the Defence Review, thus implying that the Defence Review might not continue the UK's commitment to GCAP. So we now need clarity from the Government, for Parliament, for industry, for our international partners. We are being asked to approve this SI in turn to deliver a key stepping stone for the GCAP project. So is the government still committed to that project? This is my guess at what is currently happening. I would be truly staggered, Mr. Speaker, if the government were to withdraw from a programme that it has previously given such fulsome support for, not because they are a party that doesn't know a good U-turn, but because that would bring international ramifications that do not bear thinking about, either for the Foreign Office or the Ministry of Defence. Yep. Rather, in my view, it is another department we need to have in mind, one that I also had the pleasure to serve in, which is the Treasury. I suspect the overall question of whether the government is committed to GCAP or not is a red herring. What really matters is whether they are committed to funding it this year, with important spending decisions to be made right now, and they'll be in the inbox of the Secretary of State funding decisions on GCAP, and we want to see them continuing that funding in the years beyond. And we want to know whether they are using this review as a chance to shift spending decisions to the right. It is not unprecedented in the history of the Treasury to work in this way, under successive governments probably, offering illusory short-term savings but causing immediate and lasting pain to the most important conventional defence programme of our time. To be clear, and I mean this, I have the greatest respect for the way the Treasury has to balance the books and be responsible for the nation's finances. I was delighted that the previous government proposed moving to 2.5%, once it was both affordable, because we were prepared to make difficult decisions to fund that 2.5% by reducing the size of the civil service back to pre-pandemic levels, and also sustainable, because far from this government inheriting what the Chief Secretary has described as the worst economic inheritance since World War II, we did what we promised and only moved to 2.5% once the economic conditions allowed, namely inflation back to target, Mr. Speaker, healthy economic growth, and a deficit heading towards a little over 1% over the forecast period. So that is our clear pathway to 2.5% versus their uncertainty and delay on that pathway, which makes the real difference. To understand the direct, short-term importance of 2.5%, and its relevance to GCAP and this statutory instrument, Mr. Speaker, we only need to go back to what the now Secretary of State said in that response, which I referred to earlier, to the statement from Grant Shapps in December. As he went on to say when he was Shadow Secretary of State, this month, the National Audit Office reported on the MOD's equipment plan. It exposed a £17 billion black hole in Britain's defence plans and showed that ministers have lost control of the defence budget. Well, Mr. Speaker, it is not so much that we lost control of the defence budget, rather Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine and sent inflation soaring all around the world. And in a world that was then in a rush to rearm, inevitably this context caused an inevitable hit to the costs of major defence projects and materiel. And I personally have never pretended otherwise. But bearing in mind the equipment plan, which is the MOD's forward inventory, sir, is over 10 years, the National Audit Office's assessment of a black hole did not take account of one particular thing, moving to 2.5% by 2030. So as I said in my wind-up to Thursday's debate on the gracious speech, by setting out a fully costed and clearly timetabled pathway to 2.5%, we were able to fix that pressure, to deal with those funding pressures head-on and ensure that our largest two programmes, the nuclear deterrent and GCAP, would be stabilised and, as a result, properly funded into the future. And I asked the then Foreign Office Minister responding to my wind-up speech to confirm that their timetable would not put funding of either programme at risk, and there was no answer, and we've had no answer today either. This is the problem. The government can afford to bring forward this SI and continue building the administrative apparatus for GCAP. But we fear it cannot afford to approve the funding requirements for the next stage of actually building the aircraft because of its vacillation on reaching 2.5%.
Whereas we're clear on this side that we support the SI on the basis that we are supporting GCAP as a whole, including putting in place the funding necessary to deliver its requirements over the urgent timescale all 3 member nations require. But this is a key point, Mr. Speaker. To all three nations, GCAP is about pace and timetable. For the UK and Italy, that means replacing the Typhoon before it is withdrawn from service towards 2040, and for Japan, with equal urgency, replacing the Mitsubishi F2. That is why any delay or deferment, whether caused by the lack of a clear timetable to 2.5% or otherwise, is so important and critical. Overall, this is my view, I happen to believe that withdrawing from GCAP now would amount to the equivalent of scrapping the Spitfire programme in the 1930s. It is that serious, Mr. Speaker. But if such an outcome is seriously under consideration, and we know that there are those in government who are hugely sceptical, then for the remainder of my remarks I want to explain ultimately why we are supporting this SI, because on this side of the House we believe GCAP is a military necessity that will bring enormous economic and strategic benefits to the United Kingdom. So to start with the military capability argument, Mr. Speaker, if there is one key lesson from Ukraine, it is that in the absence of air superiority, you face the prospect of terrible attritional warfare with huge casualties reminiscent of the worst battles in World War II.
Will my honourable friend allow me?
I give way to an old friend.
I know it's thinking very far ahead into the future, but does he accept that one of the lessons from the Ukraine combat, where we have had to give indirect support, is the importance of maintaining in mothballs, if necessary, aircraft that you've withdrawn from service so they can be made available to allies should they ever face a crisis like this. So when the happy day comes that we have this great 6th generation aircraft, can we be certain that we haven't unduly disposed of their predecessors in case someone else might need them in the future?
Well, it's an interesting question from my honourable friend, and I did find whenever I was in front of the Select Committee, and it was always a great joy, Mr. Speaker, and privilege to be cross-examined, particularly by my colleagues on this side. There is always this debate about when you withdraw platforms and when you bring in their replacement, and that will never go away, and I wish the Armed Forces Minister well when he has that unique privilege and experience of going in front of the committee. What I would say genuinely to our friend on this particular point, we have to accept it is a matter of avionic reality, if you like, that the Typhoon will reach the end of its service life, and we as a country have to replace it, and GCAP is key to that with the construction of the new core platform. So whilst investing in the best combat air capability does not guarantee air superiority in the future, it offers us the chance to deny adversaries such potentially deadly freedom of operation by maintaining technological competitiveness. But there are those who say, and I notice in the Daily Telegraph this very day, similar views expressed, why don't we just go off the shelf and simply buy more F-35s? There's even a rumour that some government departments, such as I've mentioned earlier, may take a view along these lines. We must be clear, the F-35, whilst a brilliant and highly capable aircraft, is a 5th, not a 6th generation platform, not optimised for the battle space likely to pertain by the late 2030s, and that the United States, who after all manufacture the F-35, are themselves investing in a 6th generation programme, as are our adversaries, Mr. Speaker. I
commend the Shadow Minister for what he's saying. There's a good focus now, a great focus on the issues of technology and modern technology and our companies and what they're involved with. I know that the Shadow Minister has a tremendous interest in Northern Ireland. He visits there regularly in his role in the former government. Can he perhaps give us some suggestion to this chamber in relation to our Spirit Aerospace in Northern Ireland and their role that they could and will play in the way forward for the future? Thank you so much.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman, who is an absolute champion of the defence industry in Northern Ireland. He's right. I think one of my last visits was to the Talis factory in Belfast, which is, of course, home to the NLAW and to LMM and other key munitions. But in terms of aerospace, the first SME forum I held, Mr. Speaker, as the Defence Procurement Minister, was in Larne in Northern Ireland on Armed Forces Day last year, where Spirit were one of the attendees, and I'm confident they have a strong place in the future of British aviation in the defence sector, as long as we put the funding in place and as long as we keep with the programmes. Having said all this, Mr. Speaker, there must be obviously debate when you're spending this amount of money on a capability, and I do understand why there are those who look at the sums of money involved, the timeframes and so on. And I would just say this as a former procurement minister. I would not support a programme which was purely about such a vast amount of money just for a new core platform to replace Typhoon, just to be clear. Which brings us to what GCAP is really about, and to the Minister's credit, she mentioned this in her opening remarks. One of the last visits I had to a land company, a company manufacturing armoured vehicles for this country, the chief executive I was speaking to referred to the GCAP of land. And the point is, when we talk about GCAP, yes, the A stands for air, but really, when we use GCAP in military capability terms, it means as much about how you work with autonomous systems, with uncrewed systems. This is really what the key to the sixth generation concept is. I'm very passionate about this. I was proud to bring forward the first defence drone strategy, Mr. Speaker, at the Ministry of Defence. And I think that whilst there are those concerned about the time frame, I'll just make these points. First of all, actually, the timescale for delivering GCAP is very ambitious compared to Typhoon. But in particular, there are benefits we can bring from this in capability terms on a much shorter timescale. We heard the Chief of the General Staff, who was talking about the need for the Army to be able to fight a war within 3 years. And when I was Defence Procurement Minister, I was keen to ensure that all of the services were looking at what they could do to boost lethality and survivability in the near term. And surely the key to that is how we make use of uncrewed systems, Mr. Speaker. The United Kingdom is incredibly well placed in this regard. We lead the maritime coalition in respect of Ukraine. We jointly lead it with Norway, where, of course, Ukraine's greatest military success has been naval. It has been to push back the Russian fleet, using what we might describe as innovative weapons rather than traditional, should we say, naval deployments. And likewise on land, the incredible importance of drones, it cannot be overstated. Indeed, even the psychological impact of those fighting out there. But please give way.
Mr. Speaker, I totally confer and agree with what the Minister is saying with regard to the requirement and necessity of sixth generation aircraft. And also in terms of maintaining sovereign capability. But would he agree with me that it seems peculiar that the Americans themselves are developing their own sixth generation aircraft with Lockheed Martin, the French and the Germans are developing their own sixth generation aircraft as well, and we have forged a strange partnership between the Italians and the Japanese working with ourselves to develop GCAP. Do you think that makes sense in terms of pooling effort and making sure that our allies have at least one good sixth generation fighter aircraft?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman, but I do not regard it as a strange partnership. All my experience of dealing with GCAP, of meeting my Italian and Japanese counterparts, of meeting particularly industry from all three countries, working so closely together, there's already so much work going on. It is about developing a brilliant platform which is needed by all three nations. I think there will always be a multiplicity of platforms from different countries. I think that's perfectly healthy. And I think what is good about what the Honourable Gentleman said, he's opened up this point about the debate on sovereign capability, which I will come to shortly. I just wanted to finish on the point of the uncrewed domain and what it means to be sixth generation. Because,
could he just very briefly?
Of course, it's a pleasure.
He was a very good procurement minister.
Yeah.
And we liked him at the committee because, crikey, he actually answered the questions. And he'll know from that experience that even the Americans, who have a new thing called the new Global Air Dominance Fighter, are struggling to afford that. There have been media reports in the US. They may even cancel the programme because even the Americans can't afford to do everything unilaterally anymore. In light of that, does he believe that a three-way programme represents quite good value for money?
Well, my honourable friend, who, of course, we mustn't forget, not only served in the committee, was an armed forces minister, makes an excellent point. And I think, there are those who argue we should go beyond 2.5%. I would argue that 2.5% is still a significant jump for this country. We had a funded plan. And at 2.5%, but crucially and critically, with the pathway we set out, which became an accumulation of significant additional billions of pounds for MOD, that enabled us to afford GCAP, to stabilise that programme. But I just want to make this crucial point on the uncrewed part, because I have to be frank. the uncrewed side of Navy, Army, Air Force, these are not funded programmes. The funding has come hitherto primarily from support for Ukraine. Now, that is entirely logical because under the Defence Drone Strategy, we're very clear. There's no point now, the Army, for example, ordering large-scale drones. They may order them to train with, but the technology is changing so fast. What we need as a country to build, what I set out in the drone strategy, is the ecosystem to develop them, and we are doing that. I said it in my statement on the integrated procurement model, my most inspiring moment as Defence Procurement Minister was visiting a UK SME that was building a drone for use in Ukraine, highly capable platform, but brilliantly was getting feedback and re-spiralling it, as we call it, the very next day, Mr. Speaker. So I just want to make this point that on GCAP, it should be a technology for the whole of defence. It should be a pan-defence technology of how we team with uncrewed systems, how the Navy fights with an uncrewed fleet above the surface and below the surface, for the Army as well, and of course for the Air Force. Just two final points on military capability. There's been a couple of points floating around the press. The first, that the Army somehow is putting out their opposition to GCAP. I find that impossible to believe. The idea, of course, if the Army wants to succeed, it needs the support of the Air Force and so on. And I think that's why an integrated approach to procurement is so important, not single service competition. There's also been this point that we should choose, Mr. Speaker, between GCAP and AUKUS, as if somehow when the next war comes, the Russians will sort of step into our dressing room and ask if we'd like to bowl or bat. You know, would we like to fight on land or sea? What is our preference? The fact is we don't know where the threat will come from, but we know that it is growing, and therefore we should support both GCAP and AUKUS, not least for the enormous economic benefit they bring, which you'll be pleased to know, Mr. Speaker, brings me to the last part of my speech on the economic benefits of GCAP. So there are those who say buy off the shelf, and we would stress how in a state of ever greater war readiness, it pays to have operational independence and sovereignty. But in particular, investing in the great tradition of UK combat air offers huge economic gains for every part of the country. In 2020, PricewaterhouseCoopers estimated that the Tempest programme alone will support an average of 20,000 jobs every year from 2026 to 2050. Those are well-paid jobs, Mr. Speaker, in every constituency up and down in the country, and many in Lancashire, as you all know, sir. Scrapping GCAP would hit our economy hard. Even delaying or deferring GCAP expenditure will undermine our brilliant aerospace industry on display this past week at Riyadh and Farnborough, and cast doubt over vast sums of private investment that's waiting, from which hundreds of UK SMEs would stand to benefit. And there was an interesting point raised by the Leader of the Opposition earlier, asking the Prime Minister about export and discussions with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Let me just say it's an incredibly important point. I was clear that in reforming procurement, you have to have exportability at the heart of it, because otherwise industrial supply chains wither. It's as simple as that. The demand from this country is not big enough. This has been the French lesson for many years. That's why they put so much effort into export, and we need to do the same, whether it's GCAP or any other platforms or capability manufactured by the United Kingdom. So to undermine GCAP is to undermine our economy, our future warfighting capability and relations with our closest international partners. The government should instead embrace GCAP wholeheartedly and confirm that it stands by its previous position of steadfast